I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up on Geno TV and Channel 99. Our guest today is Ken Gentner, who is the president of the Naushop Homeowners Association. Welcome, Ken. Glad
Good to be here. Thanks very much.
Somebody from Naushop was on a year or so ago when the development of the Glowacki property across the street was being discussed. And at that time, there was concern about not only traffic, but the scale of the development, the possible development of the north side or east side of Old South Road. And are those scale issues and so forth, have they been taken care of relatively satisfactorily from the Naushop standpoint?
Well, let's step back, and then I'll answer the question. There was, over a course of about 18 months, a Naushop crossing area plan that was negotiated among the parties, and those parties included the Valero family, included Richmond Great Point Development, and other abutters on Lover's Lane and Witherspoon and other people who live, who are residents in the area. The purpose of that was to hammer out, in gross terms, the details of development that would take place in Naushop Crossing, which encompasses Naushop and those other abutters. None of us expected that the land around us would remain open or virgin and never be developed. So the purpose of the area plan was to kind of set the boundaries for all of that. And a lot of the details start to come out as subdivision plans, like the Richmond Great Point development proposals for housing across the street that comprise both apartments and single-family homes, some of which will be affordable. Not all, but some.
But wasn't the emphasis originally in that plan on retail? At least the perception was that it was on retail, the retail development of the front of the Valero property, the retail development of the parcel across Old South Road, which does have, you know, there's something going on there too, but wasn't that sort of the major focus?
I would agree that it was. The whole idea was to kind of define the interface between residential and non-residential, so commercial and retail. And there is commercial and retail that goes on in that area today.
Right.
So what we're talking about is what would the rest of the development look like,
Okay, so back to my question.
So what are the issues? The biggest issue for us is traffic and infrastructure. Size of development is still a matter to be determined. There's a retail cap in the area, 20,000 square feet. Commercial, property holders have by right development opportunities, so without relieving that cap, there can be development. That's what we see in the Richmond Great Point liner building proposal that was teed up at the planning board this week.
What was that?
Well, there are 5 what are so-called liner buildings because they line Old South that David Arminetti presented at the planning board to begin that discussion and to get feedback from the planning board on the proposals as
Is that vacant lot basically that's on the...
That long stretch that goes down from the Old South Diner to the Gregland Avenue.
Yes.
Which isn't an official road, by the way.
Gregland Avenue.
That's correct. It's a kind of a Walter Glowacki creation that has persisted. And
well, there are a lot of those.
Probably going to change.
Not all started by Walter, but
That's right.
There are a lot.
That's right.
Anyway.
So are all the issues settled? No, absolutely not. And some of the discussion in the planning board process or in the planning process will have to come out and then be determined. But we negotiated a very hard-nosed way, but on an upfront way, with the other parties, including Richmond Great Point, and I think that the area plan established some principles of development that we can live with and that they're going to uphold.
So what are some of the issues other than the traffic that are still of concern?
Well, I think that the infrastructure beside traffic includes the sewer feeds that have to come out of that property, and so Richmond Great Point, and I don't need to speak for them, but They've committed to make some upgrades to the infrastructure of that sort in the area, which is good.
In other words, the public sewer line,
Yeah.
they're going to improve.
That's correct.
That's part of it,
Yeah,
yeah.
they have to make that more resilient and redundant and failure-proof, because that's a pretty critical
Right.
aspect of it. But there are always development guidelines that have to be followed. There's the development with Nantucket in mind, I think, is the actual name of the guide,
the HDC.
HDC guide,
Right.
and so they'll follow that. We, besides the details of what kind of commercial or retail development will go in there, are honestly most concerned about the traffic. And so that's been our focus, and Richmond, Great Point knows that, and the town knows that.
What have they offered in their proposal to the planning board?
Well, what they've proposed is a good start, and I don't mean that to suggest that there's more that is needed from them. I think that the rest of it has to come from the town. But what they've proposed is to put a turn lane from Lover's Lane down to the new entrance that they're going to create once the Gregland Avenue situation is resolved.
Straightened out, whatever.
Literally, I think it goes away.
Yeah.
And so
But there
then
will
there's
be a
new
road through
boulevard.
there.
There will. There are a couple of main thoroughfares. One that goes up to Lover's Lane, and one that will come back out to Old South, about midway between our Goldfinch East and West entrance and exit. But while that addresses the traffic in and out of their living community, the residential community, and they have some other plans for in and out access to the liner buildings, that kind of kicks the can down the road. It doesn't really solve the problem. The big elephant in the room is the traffic that exists even today on Old South Road, and that's of course going to get worse without mitigation. I don't mean that in some
You mean
judgmental way.
all the way to the Rotary?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, from the airport to the Rotary, if you think about that corridor, the nature of that corridor has changed a lot over time. You know, before
And that's been an intentional effort by the town to focus certain types of activity, by the planning board to focus certain types of activity in that area.
Well, that's true. There was a Mid-Island master plan, and then there was follow-on work, including the area plan for us. As I understand it, the area plans are called for and executed when there are issues to be resolved with respect to build out according to the master plan. So that's why they kind of focus neighborhood by neighborhood and get the parties together and then help them resolve the issues. But having said that, the intent of the town is to see neighborhood development occur along Old South and in other areas. You know, the same applies to Sconset or Matticat or any other place where there's a community, and the idea is to try to minimize unnecessary in and outflow and unnecessary traffic, obviously, because that creates burdens elsewhere. But having said that, they're encouraging area development in the North area. It still isn't an island on an island.
I understand that the new building that's going in at the corner of, I haven't heard anything official on this, but the new building that's going in on the corner of Amelia Drive and Old South Road is a market.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's going to generate traffic on Amelia, and Amelia is grossly undersized. I'll say it. You know, it's a game of chicken to go up and down Amelia with a car, and that's going to add traffic. The thing that shocked me, frankly, that I heard only recently is that once the hospital construction begins, that the helipad will be decommissioned and the med flights will go in and out of the airport.
That's correct.
Now, I don't want to be a cardiac patient trying to get to Mass General or whatever my hospital
Old
of choice
South
might
Road.
be, and then go along Old South at the peak of traffic. You know, where's that ambulance going to go?
Actually, it's probably going to go out the Sconset Road and cut over.
Yeah, which adds time.
It may not. It may actually be shorter.
Yeah, well, under the circumstances, that's right. So, you know, you have that,
But it's response time for the fire department, it's response time for EMTs, it's response time for police.
all of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah, that's right. And then on top of that, the
There's convenience factor.
well, certainly, but the if you want to stay on the traffic infrastructure, you know, there were plans, studies in the mid 2000s and later, and especially as the hospital considered moving to the Wannacomet property. There were improvements that were discussed for the Milestone Rotary and for Fairgrounds. But what we heard Mike Burns say last week is that those aren't the priorities. Right. That the big priority is, I guess, the Four Corners, and probably
even
at least one other place.
That's years down the road.
Yes, and so we were talking earlier about a decade or more of change along Old South. They could see this coming, and I guess the message that I have is start now. The alternatives on Old South are rather few. The big thing that you can do is to add a turn lane along its entire length. I believe, and I'm a layman, I admit, but nevertheless, I know a right of way when I see it. And if you look at where the properties are along Old South, they're all set well back. And I believe that's because the town holds a right of way and could widen the road. Now, we were talking earlier about what is on the table from Richmond Great Point. They're going to do that along their property, but that's not enough.
Do they own that corner where the Old South Diner is too? Is that part of their property?
I believe that it is. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that all falls within, if it's not independently owned, privately owned, then it's within theirs. And they're going to pave Lover's Lane as far as, I think, Nancy Ann Lane, which is a short parallel road to Old South. You know, the town really needs to tell us what their comprehensive plan is. I know Mike said that there would be a study coming this winter, but I think that if we wait for that study to be completed and then wait for it to be prioritized, we're going to be swimming in traffic.
So what you're saying is you'd like to see a greater sense of urgency on the town side in pursuing solutions to these issues.
Absolutely. I think that they know enough to take some action now, and then they can refine that as they go along. You know, Mike talked about, I think, a total road concept, which is fair, but you can build your total road after you
But if they put bicycle lanes along Old South Road as it now exists, of course there is a bike path. But,
that's right.
But still, I mean, you know, the idea of putting something on the pavement to narrow it even further.
Well, if they even did that, my sense is that you have a concept and then you refine it according to the situation on the ground.
Right.
And with a bike path already adjacent to the road, and it's a very busy bike path, you probably don't need to put bike traffic on or near the road. You've got a path for that purpose. And same for foot traffic.
What about crossings?
Well, crossings are a big deal. You know, Fairgrounds Road, at some point, I believe there's going to have to be a roundabout there. The Richmond Great Point Development folks have a provision. They've got sufficient land to put a roundabout at their new entrance at some point in time. Those things are both helpful and hurtful because what they do is slow traffic down somewhat, at least, because we have that experience at Sparks and Pleasant now, outside the post office. You know what traffic is like there, and it can back up, and traffic could still back up on Old South. But I think that those things will ultimately be present.
Are the North Shop property owners pretty much all behind this effort on your part?
I think they trust the board. The board communicates with them regularly. There are people always who are outspoken, and we encourage that. And frankly, I encourage our owners to speak independently.
How many of the owners there are year-round?
About a third, you know, and that's a good question to ask because I don't know if folks have a good understanding of that. But there are about 196 residential homes in North Shop. There are a couple of commercial buildings that were really the original sales office and some other things. But about 196 owners, about a third. So a third are year-round, a third are seasonal owners who don't rent, and then about a third rent their properties. So you could look at it as an income property. I think North Shop is an undervalued community on the island. We've worked hard to make it a beautiful community. You could probably add 7 figures to any house there if you just moved it somewhere else. and I'd rather than move somewhere else, I would rather have people come to appreciate us more.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I understand there were, I should remember, but I don't, that there was an asphalt plant there and some other fairly unattractive industrial uses. And-
From time to time, people remind us of those things. I like to say that was then, this is now.
Right.
And you could point to, in fact...
Well, no, I didn't mean it in a negative
No.
sense. I meant it in a positive that if anything, the neighborhood has been improved
and
substantially.
it absolutely has. And we should probably thank whoever the prior owner was for some of the nice contours, because it is not just a piece of flat earth.
Right.
It's a pretty...
Right.
That's a
Well,
pretty place
and
to
to
live.
a certain extent, the same thing I think can be said about Richmond Great Point, that they're doing an incredible job in cleaning up.
As I said
yeah.
at the planning board, they're to be thanked for that.
Yeah.
And they and the planning board have worked hard, I think, to remediate
Yeah.
what's there. And I trust them to do what's right as they build out.
I'd like to pick up on one other point you made. You said only a part of it is affordable. Probably it will end up in something of the same ratio of ownership year-round, summer rental. But I like to think of it in terms of workforce housing, not just, quote, affordable in the legal sense housing.
Right.
I mean, there is a dearth of housing on this island that is affordable with a small a, that the year-round workforce or even long seasonal workforce can find.
You're
even if
absolutely
they have
right.
the money to find it.
You're absolutely right.
And for
That's
that-
why we're not opposed to what's going on across the street. We see the need just as everybody else does. We need those services just
Right.
as everybody else does. And so if the workers who provide those services can live affordably here, that's great.
one of the components of it is a complex of apartments.
That's correct.
And I don't know how the North Property Owners Association feels about that. How do you feel? Because the apartments are a new concept on this island.
They are.
There have been houses that have been cut up into apartments, but in terms of being built as apartments, there are virtually none.
That's correct. There were some warrant articles, I think, 2 years ago that established or relieved these apartment restrictions. And so this is, as well as zoning changes that were voted in at the last town meeting to allow that sort of thing to go on. I don't think that that's a train that we should step in front of. Everybody might think nostalgically about the past and wish they could roll back the clock. At one point there was a proposal for 65 large lot premium residences in there. And who knows, maybe if the voters of Nantucket had the choice to make again, they would go that way rather than go the route that led to these proposals. But the proposals are the proposals, and at this point, the zoning supports it, and the need is clear enough that nobody would oppose it. What we want to make sure is that it's done right.
And it's done right and in consideration of the neighborhood and everybody else who uses Old South
Absolutely.
Road.
Absolutely. And so far what I've seen from Richmond Great Point looks like they're going in the right direction.
Ken Gentner. Great, thank you.
Thanks,
North Shore
Dan.
Property Owners Association.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.